Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 9 running back rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics related to the running back position, beginning with matchups, then transitioning into talking about my top 40 running back rankings. If you guys are looking for my thoughts on a specific player, you could travel down to the description of the video. Down there, we have timestamps available like we do in every single video. While you're down there, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe and, of course, click the bell notification button. I live stream every single day on the channel. I will be starting today's live stream starting at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll talk about some potential waiver wire pickups going into this, upcoming waiver period. On top of all the news that occurred earlier this morning, Joe Flacco named the starting quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts. Stephon Diggs, season-ending ACL injury. Diontae Johnson being traded to the Baltimore Ravens. We'll talk about all those implications throughout that live stream, so be sure to swing on by. As always, I greatly appreciate all the support. So let's go ahead and let's begin talking about matchups in regards to Week 9 running backs. As you guys can see to the right side of the screen, I've gone ahead and isolated running back rushing statistics allowed by each individual defense. Over the course of this season thus far, on a per game average, the Carolina Panthers are allowing the most fantasy points per game on average to opposing running backs based on rushing statistics, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns. They've allowed 1,028 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs, which is 22.6 fantasy points per game on average. As we progress, of course, we're going to refer back to these statistics over the course of today's episode, but these are the matchups we want to take advantage of. Running backs against the Panthers, Dolphins, Patriots, Cowboys, Seahawks, Commanders. On a weekly basis, we find an abundance of overall success for our running backs in these overall instances. And this is just rushing statistics isolated. Even though matchup don't really give us an indicator as to whether or not our running backs are going to find themselves receiving upside, they can certainly do so if in fact their offense, their quarterback, want to continue to get them involved in that overall category. Now, with this all presented, we want to talk about obviously some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into the given week. Like we talk about on a consistent basis, running backs against the Kansas City Chiefs and Baltimore Ravens are typically not great matchups. The Chiefs thus far this season are allowing less than 3 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. Alexander Mattison had 14 carries for 15 yards on Sunday. Just putting it into perspective, sure, he's not the greatest overall back, but they have done that to many of running backs over the course of the season, so be very careful with some of the more difficult matchups like the Ravens, Chargers, Vikings, Broncos, Eagles, etc. in regards to your running backs on the ground finding themselves success in that overall category. With this all covered, before we continue into talking about my top 40 running back rankings, a reminder, if you guys haven't yet checked them out already, be sure to check out Underdog. There's a link down in the description. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only will you get the first-time deposit offer, potentially tail some of the upcoming picks. Yesterday's picks hit in regards to the Thursday night matchup, but you'll get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings, including flex. So for those of you interested, be sure to use code Andrew today. Check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility, and if in fact you are not eligible based on your location or if you've used a code in the past, you can always check out the Patreon where you'll find access to Thursday and Sunday morning rankings. On top of that, be able to ask me unlimited questions in regards to fantasy football related topics. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get into the top 40 conversation in regards to our running backs, beginning with Joe Mixon. I think it's pretty simple. Joe Mixon has been one of the most impactful fantasy running backs thus far this season when healthy. Over the course of the last 4 healthy games he has played, he has put up a minimum of 100 yards and 1 touchdown every single game and scored over 21 fantasy points in a half PPR in each of those games. The overall consistency of production has certainly been there. The utilization on the ground, through the air, it doesn't matter. They're giving him, in some of these games, 25 plus touches on a consistent basis, yet he's able to continue with this level of high efficiency. Behind this offensive line, they're continuing to dominate, and they have a matchup this upcoming Thursday against the New York Jets. Yes, it is a short week. He had himself 29 touches on Sunday, but overall, when we talk about Stephon Diggs having a season-ending injury, no Nico Collins for another consecutive week here, this is going to be a run-first approach on Thursday night, taking on the New York Jets, which I do believe is going to be enough to help Joe Mixon continue his streak of success for fantasy purposes, obviously an auto start. Number 2, we have Kyren Williams. In the return of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, it just provides more red zone upside for this offense as a whole. And even though a lot of the red zone upside went in the direction of Matthew Stafford, distributing it to Demarcus Robinson, Cooper Kupp, and then obviously one lucky receiving touchdown to Kyren Williams for 7 consecutive games has scored 1 touchdown minimum. So if he's going to have himself opportunities of scoring more than 1 touchdown going forward because of the overall contributions and the ability for this offense to move the ball consistently down the field, of course, his value continues to increase. They take on the Seattle Seahawks this week, a defense that is the 5th best matchup at the running back position. They're allowing over 18 fantasy points per game on the ground alone, on top of the fact that Kyren Williams last week, 7 targets, 5 catches, 19 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown that can always be implicated. And on top of the fact that, of course, amongst all teams, the Seattle Seahawks are one of the worst teams in terms of running back yards per carry allowed, in terms of efficiency allowed. Thus far this season, they're allowing 5.33 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. Kyren Williams is implicated for a massive performance against a division rival. Number 3, we have Alvin Kamara taking on the Carolina Panthers. Like we've talked about ad nauseum over the entire course of the season, the Carolina Panthers are the easiest matchup at the position. And even though we have seen 2 different running backs thus far this season not take full advantage of that being Jahmyr White and, on top of that, most recently, Javonte Williams, Alvin Kamara is not a running back to let this kind of opportunity slide past him. In week 1 against the Carolina Panthers this season, 15 carries for 83 yards and a rushing touchdown, 5 receptions for 27 receiving yards, 19.5 fantasy points. On top of the fact that they take on the Carolina Panthers this week, they get Derek Carr back. With Derek Carr back in the lineup, it continues to elevate the overall potential for success within this offense. And considering Rashid Shaheed is out for the season, we have seen an abundance of overall targets continue to go in the direction of Alvin Kamara. 11 targets this last week. I'm assuming with Derek Carr back in the lineup, the checkdowns are going to continue to stay consistent, and his overall upside within the upcoming matchup should be very exciting. Number 4, we have Derrick Henry, an automatic play as of usual. 8 consecutive weeks in a row in which he's had himself 1 touchdown minimum. Even though he only played 50% of the overall snaps in Sunday's game against the Cleveland Browns, it does not matter. He is highly efficient when given opportunity, and hopefully, if in fact the game script this week is not going to be a negative game script in which the Baltimore Ravens are trying to claw themselves back into the game, of course, we would see far more Derrick Henry in terms of overall rushing attempts and utilization, and hopefully red zone upside. Again, like I mentioned every single week, via Underdog, you can go ahead and make an entry every single week. You would have been 100% correct thus far this season in terms of Derrick Henry anytime rushing or receiving touchdown, on top of the vulture protection if in fact Lamar Jackson scores a rushing touchdown. It's an automatic play every single week. Make sure to put it within an entry going into this week. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about the A tier, beginning with our number 5, Saquon Barkley. Look, Saquon Barkley we know is a stud, coming off of another week in which he's able to eclipse 100 total all-purpose yards. But unfortunately, Jalen Hurts having 3 rushing touchdowns is just the nature of the beast. It is going to happen. We have seen it over the course of this season thus far and in seasons prior. Jalen Hurts is going to find himself, some of these games in which he scores 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns. It is what it is. Going forward, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm expecting a positive game script considering the Jacksonville Jaguars defense cannot stop a soul. But on top of that, we most recently just saw Josh Jacobs tear apart this defense on the ground and have himself a dominant performance. Additionally, on top of that, if the Jacksonville Jaguars offense isn't able to keep up, which I don't expect them to do so, with the loss of guys like Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis getting injured, and of course Brian Thomas Jr. getting injured, even if everyone is equipped and ready to go, we already know that Christian Kirk's out for the season. There's a chance that Travis Etienne misses or some of these wide receivers additionally also miss. If that's going to be the case and they cannot keep up with the Philadelphia Eagles offense, expect a lot of rushing attempts from Saquon Barkley in the second half and a lot of fantasy points to follow. Number 5, we have Bijan Robinson. Look, Bijan Robinson, a 3rd consecutive game in which he's able to total 100 plus total all-purpose yards. Incredible overall numbers. In terms of the overall fantasy points per game, on average, over the course of the last 3 weeks, 19 plus fantasy points every single time out, mainly because of the opportunities being there. He has seen 18, 24, and 19 touches in the last 3 games, has scored 1 touchdown per game on average over the course of the last 3 weeks, and has an opportunity of taking on the Dallas Cowboys, the 4th best matchup at the position, allowing over 18.5 fantasy points per game on average on the ground. Much less, Bijan Robinson coming off an incredible game in which he had 6 targets, 6 catches, 37 and a receiving touchdown. With all of that implicated, we are anticipating another huge week for Bijan Robinson here. Number 7 is Achane. Speaking of receiving upside, over the course of the last 3 consecutive games in which he has played with a healthy Tua Tagovailoa, he has had himself a minimum of 6 receptions every single game. Weeks 1 and 2, 7 receptions in both of those games. Those 14 receptions leading to 140 receiving yards. This most recent week against the Arizona Cardinals, 6 receptions on 8 targets, 50 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. The vast contribution of targets going in the direction of Achane isn't slowing down anytime soon. He is a big part of this offense, on top of the fact that he is a highly efficient runner. 10 carries for 97 rushing yards, while you have Raheem Mostert getting himself less than 2 yards per carry on average this last week, even though he scored 2 rushing touchdowns. I expect the touchdowns to hopefully go back in the direction of Achane near the goal line. Taking on the Buffalo Bills is not an easy matchup, but we do anticipate a lot of success nonetheless. Number 8, we have Jahmyr Gibbs. The ascension is taking place. Like I talked about last week, slowly but surely they're getting him the touches that he requires, and he is really beginning to take over. Coming off of a week in which he had a huge 50-plus yard rushing touchdown, if he's going to continue to succeed in this overall manner. Again, last week against the Tennessee Titans, he stopped playing. His final touch of the game was with 1 minute and 57 seconds left in the third quarter. Just imagine the overall statistics he could have had within the overall game. But either way, as we progress, we take on the Green Bay Packers this week. As of late, the Green Bay Packers have been a running funnel. They've allowed 127 on the ground to the LA Rams, and a rushing touchdown. The Houston Texans 123 and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Jacksonville 81 on the ground. There's been a lot of potential for running backs to succeed against them recently. We have seen Detroit even last season succeed on the ground against the Green Bay Packers. They should be able to do so once again in 2024. James Cook, the thumbnail of today's episode, is our number 9. James Cook finally looks fully healthy. If you go back to the game against the Tennessee Titans in week 7, it was clear in a way that his toe injury was still an issue. Obviously, he missed that week 6 game on Monday Night Football against the New York Jets with that toe injury. Ray Davis obviously filled in and played incredibly well. But going into week 7, I thought there could be a lingering situation in which Ray Davis gets more touches in order to protect James Cook and his overall health. Obviously, he is fully healthy. 17 carries for 112, 2 rushing touchdowns. That, again, is his 8th total touchdown scored thus far this season in the last 6 games. You got to remember, James Cook, in his entire career, hasn't even gotten close to 8 total touchdowns. This is an all-time high for him. And now that we're seeing far more utilization with him near the red zone rather than Josh Allen, even though Josh Allen is getting red zone rushing attempts, do not get it twisted. He is still getting himself designed runs and scrambles in that area. So if in fact he steals a touchdown, don't be surprised. But this is obviously a great sign for James Cook and his overall fantasy baseline of production. This week they take on the Miami Dolphins. Back in week 2 against the Dolphins, scored 28 fantasy points, scored 3 touchdowns in that game. And on top of the Dolphins are the second best matchup at the position, allowing over 19 fantasy points per game on the ground. Anticipate a lot of success from James Cook this week. Number 10, we have Aaron Jones. Look, last time out against the LA Rams, even though it was an advantageous matchup, he just didn't show up. And the fact of the matter is, losing Christian Darrisaw, their offensive tackle, their left tackle that they paid a lot of money to this offseason, is going to be brutal going forward. But hopefully this offense is going to continue to stick with the running game, and they're going to keep the overall touches consistent going into this week's matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, the 10th best matchup at the position. We just saw, of course, Joe Mixon for a second time in 2024 run for over 100 total yards against them and a touchdown minimum. If in fact they're going to give that kind of opportunity share to Aaron Jones, which we're hoping is going to be the case, anticipate a lot of production at a top 10 capacity with a minimum of 1 touchdown within the upcoming contest. Number 11, we have Breece Hall. Look, Breece Hall didn't get himself as much opportunity as we had seen the 2 weeks prior with the new offensive coordinator. I don't know why they decided, hey, you know what, let's give a lot of touches to Braelon Allen. Not only that, but they decided to give Braelon Allen a red zone rushing attempt at the end of the game. Breece Hall comes in, has a rushing attempt inside the 5-yard line for 1 yard only. Okay, very well. The next play, Braelon Allen comes in, steals a rushing touchdown. These are things that, again, we cannot control as fantasy managers. These are things that are just going to happen to us. It is the unfortunate nature of the backfield, but this is much of a surprise, especially considering Braelon Allen had himself, 12 rushing attempts? And on top of it, he was highly inefficient with those touches. I'm not sure why they didn't give Breece Hall the ball 25 times on the ground, and I don't understand why they stopped throwing him the ball out of the backfield. He had been highly efficient in his overall receiving workload in each of the last 2 prior games, and then they went ahead and they just completely avoided it. Hopefully, they're going to do some, self-evaluation, self-reflection, and realize Breece Hall is the offense. We cannot let Aaron Rodgers control the game, because if in fact he does, we might lose once again against Houston on Thursday night. With a quick turnaround in a short week, obviously it is great that Breece Hall didn't have himself 30 total touches, so his body isn't worn down as much, but we got to get himself more receiving utilization in order for him to be far more fantasy relevant going forward. Number 12, we have Jonathan Taylor. So obviously we all heard the information that Joe Flacco is in fact going to be the starting quarterback of the Colts going forward. That just means more target upside for Jonathan Taylor and even more potential red zone upside. Thus far this season, Jonathan Taylor, in the last 4 consecutive games he has played, 105 or more total yards every single time out. He has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 5 games he has played within this offense. And regardless of who you're taking on, especially this week taking on the Minnesota Vikings, being a great run-stop defense, regardless of matchup, I anticipate Jonathan Taylor behind this elite offensive line to continue to run the ball 18 plus times per game in order to keep the running game alive and, of course, impose their will upon this defense. Number 13, we have Kenneth Walker. Look, Kenneth Walker had himself a rough performance on top of the fact that, very similar to Breece Hall, had himself a rushing touchdown stolen within the red zone. It is unfortunate, but it is the nature of the beast. It is going to happen over the course of the season. But what is promising going forward is the fact that for 5 consecutive games here, or at least 4 of the last 5 consecutive games, we have seen Kenneth Walker with 4 or more receptions. As long as the receiving totals are going to continue to stay consistent, and especially in a potential matchup going into this week against the Los Angeles Rams, which is the 9th best matchup at the position, we would anticipate the overall rushing attempts for Kenneth Walker to be far more successful in comparison to where they were last week against the Buffalo Bills, 9 carries for 12 yards. As we progress within the upcoming matchup, I anticipate far more upside in comparison to what we saw on Sunday against the Buffalo Bills. Number 14, we have Tony Pollard. Look, the fact of the matter is when you take on the New England Patriots, you should always fire up your running backs. The New England Patriots are the 3rd best matchup at the position. The following statistics are the most recent contributions from running backs on the ground versus the Patriots defense. Most recently, the Jets, 112 and a rushing touchdown. Jacksonville, 156 and 2 rushing touchdowns. Houston, 185, 2 rushing touchdowns. Miami, 184, 1 rushing touchdown. San Francisco, 123 and a rushing touchdown. They have allowed over 110 total rushing yards and 1 touchdown minimum to opposing running backs every single week over the course of the last month. We would anticipate Tony Pollard to have himself an incredible performance coming off of another consecutive week of a lead opportunity. 20 carries on the ground for 94 against the Lions of all defenses and 3 receptions through the air. Even with Tyjae Spears returning, we are anticipating a lot of success for Tony Pollard. Number 15, we have Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs obviously had himself a fantastic week. 25 carries, 127 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but now has an opportunity of taking on the Lions. We've talked about the Lions' run-stop defense year over year, but as of late, running backs have truly taken advantage of this matchup. Of course, the Seattle Seahawks, 95 on the ground for 3 rushing touchdowns. Minnesota, 97 on the ground, 1 rushing touchdown. And Tennessee, this most recent week, 126 yards on the ground against this defense. So therefore, we are anticipating that Josh Jacobs, regardless of who's playing quarterback, Malik Willis and or Jordan Love, to find himself success against this defense that typically we've tried to avoid in the past because we don't want to have to run our running backs into a complete brick wall. There have been major holes in this defense. I would assume that the loss of Aiden Hutchinson is certainly one of those holes. And going forward, if in fact Jordan Love is in the overall matchup, it continues to increase the overall potential for Josh Jacobs. But if Malik Willis is going to be the starting quarterback, I don't think it hurts him that much because, quite frankly, when he is in the game, we have seen that they're going to give Josh Jacobs the ball 20 times on the ground minimum, which obviously continues to accelerate and kind of increase his overall baseline of production. Number 16, we have DeAndre Swift. Man, DeAndre Swift has played incredible as of the last 4 games. Since week 4, has averaged 5.36 yards per carry and has had a resurgence in terms of his overall season thus far. To begin the year, weeks 1 through 3 was awful, but again, another consecutive week of dominating. Since week 4, he's averaging 18 carries per game, 97 rushing yards per game, 1 rushing touchdown per game on average, 3.25 targets and receptions per game, 37 receiving yards per game, and 22.6 fantasy points per game since week 4. He has been incredible. Honestly, I think the number 16 spot is a disservice once again. He's been a top 12 running back each of the last 4 games. But it is sketchy. Whenever you have a possibility of Roschon Johnson jumping into the conversation and stealing goal line carries, when the team does not trust you enough to hand you off the ball on the goal line and they'd rather hand it off to an offensive guard, that is scaring me beyond belief. If it wasn't for the fact that DeAndre Swift had a huge 50-plus yard rushing touchdown, they weren't going to give him any red zone utilization inside the 5-yard line. Those went to offensive guards and Roschon Johnson, which again, does limit the overall potential for success in this circumstance, on top of the fact that he's coming off of a week of 0 total targets, which is very much so concerning in the overall scheme. It is a great matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, so considering that overall information, we still have him relatively highly ranked, and an auto start within the upcoming week. Number 17, speaking of the Arizona Cardinals, taking on the Chicago Bears, we have James Conner, who's coming off of another successful performance. In the 6 competitive games that the Arizona Cardinals have played, James Conner has scored 13.9 plus fantasy points every single time out. Again, if this is going to be a competitive matchup, which we anticipate that to be, James Conner is implicated to be a solid 13, 14, 15-point running back, which number 17 is perfect for a half PPR scoring format. Taking on the Bears, it's the 13th best matchup thus far this season. The Bears are allowing 4.75 yards per carry on average thus far this season. James Conner and his overall efficiency in terms of yards per carry on average has not been great. It has been declining as of late, but hopefully this is going to give him a little bit more juice going into the upcoming matchup. And considering the Arizona Cardinals offense is coming off of their best performance as an offense thus far this season, with the expansion of the receiving game going to Marvin Harrison, of course, Trey McBride, hopefully that's going to open up more rushing lanes for James Conner going forward. Number 18, we have David Montgomery. Again, another one of these auto-start running backs that has an opportunity of taking on the Green Bay Packers. Is he the number 2 running back technically of this offense? I would say absolutely, but he is still inherently going to get himself rushing touchdown upside. He has scored himself a rushing touchdown in 11 of the last 13 games he has played, including the 2023 NFL playoffs. On top of it, this last week, no one had it on their bingo card, but David Montgomery throwing a passing touchdown to Sam Laporta saved many of our fantasy weeks for those of us who had Laporta, but man, he put a tight spiral on that and obviously had himself a great performance of 14.4 fantasy points. But in terms of overall opportunity share, in terms of overall rushing upside, a lot of that going in the direction as I like to Jahmyr Gibbs, which kind of downgrades Montgomery's overall potential for upside. Now this week they take on the Green Bay Packers. Last season against the Packers, Montgomery was a machine. In those two games, 71 rushing yards and a touchdown, 123 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Scored 15 fantasy points minimum against the Green Bay Packers last year. Recently, like I talked about earlier with Jahmyr Gibbs, running backs have been continuing to barrel it down the throat of the Green Bay Packers. 81 rushing yards to the Jacksonville Jaguars, 123 and 2 touchdowns. The Houston running backs, 127 and a touchdown to Los Angeles Rams running backs. David Montgomery, another solid play within the upcoming week. Number 19, we have Kareem Hunt. Look, Kareem Hunt, 3 consecutive games of 22 plus touches. The last 3 games, 28, 24, 22 touches. Even though that number is going down, it does not matter because he is continuing to score touchdowns every single week. The opportunity is there, and as long as those opportunities are going to be there and Isaiah Pacheco is not implicated to return this week, I don't care which defense they face, they're continuing to rely upon the running game and give Kareem Hunt the opportunity that he deserves to be fantasy relevant, coming off of another solid performance. Taking on Tampa Bay this week, again, they've had themselves good stretches of time in which they've played well in terms of stopping opposing running backs, but taking on the Kansas City Chiefs with that secondary not playing well at all, Mahomes is going to be able to move the ball when they get in the red zone. Kareem Hunt going to find himself relevant in the end zone once again. Number 20, we have Brian Robinson Jr. Look, Brian Robinson is an incredible running back and has an incredible matchup this week taking on the New York Giants, a defense that is allowing 5.39 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. They're number 1 in the league in terms of that overall category. They're getting torched on the ground. Last time out, Brian Robinson taking on the New York Giants in week 2, 17 carries for 133 rushing yards, 1 reception for 3 receiving yards, and 14.1 fantasy points. As long as there is any sort of potential of Jaden Daniels kind of stealing rushing touchdown upside near the goal line, or if this offense is just going to air it out, there's obviously a lot of threats that could potentially decrease the overall upside of Brian Robinson within the overall conversation. But again, we've seen back-to-back weeks of a running back, either it being Saquon Barkley or Najee Harris, accumulating over 100 rushing yards against the Giants. I would expect Brian Robinson to continue his streak of 100 plus rushing yards against the Giants once again in week 9. Number 21, we have Rhamondre Stevenson. I ranked Rhamondre Stevenson really low last week. Mainly because, again, I did not anticipate that offense to be able to move the ball and find him rushing touchdowns. But yet he scored 2 rushing touchdowns, 20 carries for 48 yards. Highly inefficient, but what was very much so promising was his overall utilization and touches. He had himself 23 total touches, which is the most he has seen in a very long time. On top of that, played 81% of the overall snaps, the most he has played in a single game all season long. As long as they're going to implement him within the offense at this capacity, elite level opportunity, then of course he's going to be fantasy relevant, especially taking on the Tennessee Titans. Now I will say the Tennessee Titans run stop defense is great thus far this season. Outside of the Lions, they haven't really allowed much to opposing running backs, so take that into account. But regardless of that fact, going into this week, this is an opportunity in which the Patriots could win another game. Regardless of who plays quarterback for the New England Patriots, whether it is Jacoby Brissett or Drake May, they will have an opportunity to potentially win. And, Rhamondre Stevenson playing the vast majority of the game and touching the ball 20 plus times will have an opportunity to score and once again be fantasy relevant. Number 22, we have J.K. Dobbins. Look, J.K. Dobbins playing against the Cleveland Browns is not an easy matchup. The Cleveland Browns have a really solid run-stopping defense. Even though they allowed, 7 yards per carry and a rushing touchdown to Derrick Henry, it's Derrick Henry. That's going to happen. But in the case of J.K. Dobbins coming off of another consecutive game in which he's putting up, over 18 total touches, the elite level of opportunity is once again going in his direction. Coming off a week of 7 targets, 4 receptions. If that continues to increase, his baseline of production will continue to be that much higher. Now, again, he did get lucky and score a rushing touchdown off of a defensive pass interference penalty that moved them to the 1-yard line. Then he eventually punched it in. If it wasn't for that, of course, we could have had ourselves a very underwhelming performance. But as long as the opportunity is there and they're continuing to give him goal line touches, I would anticipate this run-first offense to continue to allow J.K. Dobbins to be relevant. Number 23, we have Chuba Hubbard. Look, the matchup against the New Orleans Saints is not a problem. The Saints are the 7th best matchup at the position, allowing over 17 fantasy points per game on the ground. Coming off of a week in which Chuba Hubbard had 17 total touches and over 70 total yards. Again, the overall matchup does not scare me. It's just, is it going to be Bryce Young or Andy Dalton? If it's going to be Andy Dalton, I would anticipate that this offense is even more capable of scoring and potentially leading Chuba Hubbard to a rushing touchdown. Therefore, I would rank him higher. But if in fact, Andy Dalton is going to miss another game and Bryce Young is going to be implicated as a starting quarterback once again, of course, his overall potential upside for success is a little bit lower. Number 24, we have Chase Brown. Look, Chase Brown has had himself 5 total touchdowns scored in the last 5 games. Even though this most recent week he was outsnapped by Zack Moss, he continues to outcarry him and be far more efficient in every single category. So as long as the opportunity is there, taking on the 11th best matchup at the position against the Las Vegas Raiders leads me to believe that Chase Brown should have himself at least 10 fantasy points minimum within the upcoming matchup in which he's able to get himself the viable overall touches, but the most valuable touches that he encounters, rushing touchdowns inside of the 10-yard line, which of course often lead to success for him. Number 25, we have Devin Singletary. So earlier today, we were given the information that, in fact, Tyrone Tracy is in the concussion protocol. As we expected, he left the game yesterday early in the fourth quarter due to that concussion protocol. If, in fact, Tyrone Tracy is not going to clear and Devin Singletary will be implicated to be the starting running back of the Giants, taking on the Washington Commanders should be an easy matchup. They're the 6th best matchup at the position. They're allowing 5.35 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. That's number 2 amongst all teams in the league. They're allowing over 17.5 fantasy points per game on the ground to opposing running backs. Earlier this year in week 2, Devin Singletary, 16 carries for 95 yards and a rushing touchdown, 16 fantasy points against that defense. We would anticipate another week of success for Devin Singletary in this overall factor. Moving on to our number 26, we have Alexander Mattison. Again, the last 4 weeks for Alexander Mattison in terms of total touches, 17, 19, 26, 19. He is being utilized as an elite level running back, and as long as the opportunity is there, it is going to lead to success. Prior to this most recent week against the Kansas City Chiefs, which is the best run-stopping defense in the National Football League, he had put up 9.1, 15.0, and 13.8 half PPR fantasy points. His fantasy success is there, implicated with receiving upside and goal line upside. Even though he's coming off of a lackluster 6.9 fantasy points, we didn't anticipate much from him because, again, the matchup was difficult. I anticipate him to be far better within a top 15 matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals run-stop defense, which over the course of the season has not played well. Number 27, we have Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle's obviously coming off of a game in which he missed against the San Francisco 49ers due to an illness. Late last week, many of you guys were asking me, Andrew, Dalvin Cook's getting himself touches within the overall offense. Is he going to play a factor within the offense? And I told you guys, I don't have any interest in Dalvin Cook. And the only reason they actually only brought him up was because Rico Dowdle was dealing with an illness. And until we were told that on Sunday, of course, none of us knew. So going forward, I anticipate Rico Dowdle to be fully healthy and have the full backfield to himself. Last time we heard, Mike McCarthy wants to get him more touches. As of late, the last 5 games that he has played, he has consisted of 11, 12, 22, and 10 touches. They take on the Atlanta Falcons this week, which again is a matchup where he can find success on the ground through the air. And if given goal line upside, could be that much higher ranked. He could be in the top 24 by the end of the week if given the ample opportunity, especially within the receiving game and inside the 5-yard line. Our number 28 and our number 29 is Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. I'm going to go ahead and just pair these two together because, again, if you play one, you could very easily play the other and find just as much fantasy success. Both of them scoring over 11 fantasy points this last week in a half PPR. In a full PPR, that much more upside considering Rachaad White had 6 targets, 5 catches, 38 yards, and a receiving touchdown through the receiving game. Bucky Irving had 7 targets, 7 catches, 40 receiving yards. Both of them highly efficient on the ground, as long as the opportunities are going to be there. As of right now, Rachaad White playing 56% of the offensive snaps, Bucky Irving playing 42%. But as long as the offense and Baker Mayfield is going to continue to target them, I don't care that they take on the Chiefs, which is the most difficult matchup at the position. As long as the receiving workload is going to be implicated, I would anticipate both of these running backs behind an offensive line that has played beyond their means thus far this season to find success. I'm anticipating both these running backs to once again be relevant in a top 30 capacity. Obviously, the receiving upside is really what kept them afloat last week, and hopefully it'll once again be there within the overall game script. Number 30, we have Tank Bigsby. Now, this is under the assumption that Etienne does play. If Etienne plays, Bigsby is the number 30 overall running back. Again, coming off of a great week in which he had 20 total touches, over 85 total yards, great overall production, despite the fact that this offense obviously was put in a negative game script early on and had to kind of claw their way back. And once they did, it was a competitive game, and he was able to get himself the rushing attempts he required. Now, unfortunately, Trevor Lawrence stealing the rushing touchdown does not kind of help Tank Bigsby in this circumstance, but going forward, with Etienne back, I would assume that Tank Bigsby's overall rushing attempts decrease, the overall receiving workload he had on Sunday decrease as well, and going in the direction of Travis Etienne going forward. Moving on to our number 31, we have Javonte Williams. Taking on the Baltimore Ravens, the second most difficult matchup at the position. Luckily for Javonte Williams, he gets receiving workload. Taking on the Carolina Panthers and having only 17 carries for 44 rushing yards is a missed opportunity, which for fantasy purposes is going to leave a bad taste in many of our mouths. But going forward, again, as long as he's going to be given receiving upside, that is his most valuable factor within this offense. He's not really the goal line back. Anytime they get down in the red zone, it's either Bo Nix stealing a rushing touchdown or Jaleel McLaughlin stealing a receiving touchdown. But at least through the receiving game, over the course of the last 4 games, Javonte Williams, 20 targets, 15 receptions in comparison to Jaleel McLaughlin, 7 targets, 6 receptions. Javonte, that is pretty much where he's going to find his value this week within the receiving game. Number 32, we have Nick Chubb. Look, Nick Chubb has been kind of slowly but surely getting himself more opportunity. And as long as that is going to stay consistent and opportunity is going to be there, he's eventually going to be elevated to a point to where this offense is playing so well with Jameis Winston that he's going to be given red zone opportunity and hopefully fall into the end zone. Coming off of a week of 52 rushing yards on 16 total carries, even though for fantasy purposes, 5.2 fantasy points is not going to cut it. Taking on the Los Angeles Chargers as of late has been quite beneficial for running backs. The New Orleans Saints running backs, 15 carries for 87 yards, a 5.8 yard per carry average against that defense. Weren't able to really run the ball late because, again, they were down 20 plus points after some time. And in the Arizona Cardinals, 20 carries for 115, a 5.75 yard per carry average against this defense. Nick Chubb could be in line for a solid performance against the LA Chargers. The number 33, we have Travis Etienne. Look, Travis Etienne takes on the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, over the course of the last 2 weeks, he has been limited throughout his practices and has had game time decision kind of updates as to whether or not he was going to play. So if in fact we're going to trend in the right direction 2 weeks out here and he is fully healed from the hamstring injury, the number 33 spot seems very fair to me. He's going to get himself rushing opportunity. He's going to get himself an abundance of receiving opportunity, especially with all the injuries that have taken place within this offense. I think he'd be in line for at least 10 touches per game going forward, and Tank Bigsby will still be the dominant force within the running game though. Moving on to our 34, Raheem Mostert. Luckily, this hidden gem was able to, not stay hidden and find himself efficiency last week, scoring 2 rushing touchdowns. I mean, efficiency really doesn't actually represent it. It's just a matter of he was given an opportunity that was extremely valuable that any other running back within this offense could have scored. But either way, going forward, as long as he's going to continue to maintain as the goal line back, as he did last season in 2023 and thus far this season in 2024, he has still got himself a baseline level of value despite the difficult matchup against the Buffalo Bills. Number 35, we have Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, again, in week 2 against the New York Giants, scored 10 fantasy points, even though as of late, he's kind of been fluctuating as I'd say maybe like a 4 to 8 point running back. That's pretty much where we're going to potentially anticipate. We're going to hope for the upside of potentially scoring 10 points as our flex option or RB3 if we are dealing with a bye week. But outside of that circumstance, expect about 6 to 8 points within the upcoming matchup. Number 36, very similar to Austin Eckler. It's another one of these running backs that, again, is going to play second fiddle to the primary starter, but Tyjae Spears is a little bit different because he's missed the last couple weeks due to injury. He's missed a lot of time this season due to injury and has an opportunity of taking on the Patriots, which, again, is a top 3 matchup. If they're going to utilize the running game in order to abuse this run-stop defense that has allowed over 110 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown to every single backfield over the course of the last 5 weeks straight, we would anticipate Tyjae Spears to still have himself a sprinkle of potential opportunity and success for fantasy purposes. 37 is Braelon Allen. Look, they utilized Braelon Allen a lot more than I anticipated. 12 carries for 32, stole a rushing touchdown with 3 minutes remaining in the game. Stole that from Breece Hall. But going forward, taking on the Texans, if this is going to be a game with the lack of receiving upside both these teams have, and on top of the fact that the Houston Texans just lost Stephon Diggs for the season, if that is going to play an impact, of course, expect Braelon Allen and this offense to be in a run-heavy script, and both these offenses actually to be in a run-heavy script, which obviously doesn't help the overall game clock, but it does help their overall fantasy potential for success. Number 38, we have Zack Moss. Look, Zack Moss outsnapped Chase Brown, but it doesn't matter. Zack Moss is not an efficient running back. He will eventually disappear. What has kept Zack Moss alive over the course of the last 4 weeks is 11 carries for 91 receiving yards. Because on the ground, he has been horrible. He has had 26 rushing attempts in the last 4 weeks for 55 rushing yards, a 2.11 yard per carry average. They got to stop giving him the ball on the ground and just purely make him a receiving back, because outside of that, he has no value. Number 39 is Roschon Johnson. I mentioned it earlier. Anytime the team gets down to the goal line, they actually trust Roschon Johnson more. Inside the 5-yard line, Roschon Johnson has more rushing touchdowns than, DeAndre Swift this season. Now, obviously, DeAndre Swift has 6 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line for -6 rushing yards. That primarily has to do with the lack of efficiency from this offensive line. But when you are leading to Roschon Johnson being the goal line back, or handing the ball off to an offensive guard who's going to fumble, that just means that the organization coaching staff does not trust DeAndre Swift on the goal line. And considering Roschon Johnson has scored 4 rushing touchdowns in the last 4 games, he is still implicated for fantasy points. Number 40, the last running back I wanted to go ahead and mention is Tyler Algier. If, in fact, the Falcons take an early lead, of course, anticipate a lot of running in the second half. Tyler Algier coming off of another week in which he had 10-plus total touches on the ground. If those opportunities are going to be there against a top 5 matchup, he could even find that much more potential for upside in the upcoming matchup. All right, that's going to cover it for my Week 9 running back rankings. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate y'all. If you have not yet already, subscribe, click the like button down below. I'll be back at 7 p.m. PST later tonight, talking all things fantasy football. Be sure to swing on by if you're interested. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.